Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of a harmonic journey. And this time we're going to continue with our abdominal breathing. This is so important. I can't stress this enough. Now again, we're not doing spiritual exercises. Spiritual exercises are where we are bringing our energy up into the center of our head and chanting a sacred tone. In the movement of spiritual and awareness, we chant the hue or other tones, sometimes called initiatory tones, that vibrate this area, and with the idea that we're bringing the soul energy up into the center of the head, and then we go beyond that and in many ways travel out of the body or into the inner realms of consciousness, or really back inside, whatever analogy you want, but certainly to a different vibrational level. That's spiritual exercises. What we're doing here is meditation. And the meditative aspect is very different, and it's really with the view towards health and well-being. Anyway, that's my objective here. It does have a spiritual aspect to it because it moves us into a calmer place. And when we talk about spiritual, we are all spiritual. So it's not like we have to do anything to be spiritual. And the breathing is the same thing, really, in a very analogous way. We don't have to do breathing. And this is probably one of the more confusing aspects of people, because they're taught breathing techniques. And in the breathing that we're doing, is a much more kind of, I guess it could be called Taoist breathing, as in Tao, the Tao. But it's almost like natural breathing, or we could just call it effortless breathing. This idea of not interfering, of doing nothing, of non-action. But it's not doing nothing in terms of any kind of laziness. It's just a letting go. So I want to go over this and then talk a little bit about this area called the Dan Tien. Very commonly heard in, particularly when you're meditating, a lot of people mention the Dan Tien. In Japanese, the hara, H-A-R-A, hara. And there's actually, I think, a book or technique out called the 3 H's, which is the head, the heart, and the hara. Of course, it's cheating a little bit because the hara is a Japanese word, but that's the idea. Remember, we talked about the 3 brains, if you saw that in another episode. The 3 brains being the head brain, we also have the heart brain, and also the belly brain. And these are actual brains. They actually have intelligence, and they communicate with our head brain. Here we're talking about the belly brain. This area here called the lower Dan Tien. And the Chinese were on top of this many hundreds or thousands of years ago. They had the upper Dan Tien, the heart Dan Tien, and the belly, the lower Dan Tien. And Dan means kind of elixir, and the Tien means field. It's kind of a field of elixir. A little bit complicated and esoteric, but we could just look at it as a rechargeable battery or a source of intelligence. So it's got its own intelligence, but it also is this kind of electromagnetic field. So the camera here can't get to my belly. I don't think you have to see my belly. You can feel your own belly. We're talking about the region just below the umbilical cord, the belly button. So if you can be with me for a second, if you put your finger on your belly button and you take these 2 fingers, and as you've got it on your belly button, put them underneath, and then take your finger that's in the belly button underneath, and then pop it here, and that will be what's called Ren 6. That'll be the area of the Dan Tien. Now, here's where it gets a little bit complicated. It's not there. I mean, a lot of people will tell you it's there, and it's kind of called a false Dan Tien. But if you just massage that a little bit, you may find it's sensitive or feels a little bruisey. Basically, what we want to do is take that point and use that as a horizontal point and then go inside the belly in terms of a location. And the point where it meets the vertical would be just above the perineum. The perineum is that area between the anus and the sexual organs, and you can kind of contract it a little bit just to see where it is. It's not like you're contracting either of the organs, your anus or your sexual organs, but in between. You get this little sensitivity there in terms of, it takes a little bit while to find it. But that kind of area, if you take that as the vertical, then where those intersect, if I'm going into my body this way, and then I go in deep enough, and where some people call it the perineum or the perineum, where that intersects, that's the area of the Dan Tien, and it's a very kind of small, like half my thumb, the top of my thumb area as a reference point. Now, so much to say about the Dan Tien, and way outside the scope of these episodes. I'm just kind of giving you a reference point because we want our breath to sink downwards naturally and into that area called the Dan Tien. Now, some of you who know about spiritual exercises can see an analogy here. It's almost like we're finding coordinates. And John Roger tells us that the center of the head where we can meditate, the third eye region exactly, is like a lot of people think the third eye is here. And I think because of the bindi or whatever. And indeed, we can feel pressure there, just as we can feel that Ren 6 point below the belly button, just as our mind goes there, because it tends to want to have places to go. Our mind always wants to go places and wants to go many places. But John Roger tells us to identify that third eye point is actually we have to go in. So that's kind of like the horizontal plane. And then that can be met just above our ears so that we're in the center of our head. And another way of doing it is the vertical from the crown downwards. So that would be a way of identifying that upper area, that upper spiritual center for spiritual exercises. And John Roger goes out of his way to kind of almost say, look, get it kinesthetically. And that's essentially what I'm saying here as well, is just like feel that point below the belly button, as I just indicated, and then go inside until you get the perineum. Most people think it's more on the surface or the abdominal wall. They're kind of surprised to find it's a bit further back than they expect. Now, we want to be upright for this because we're breathing, we don't want to be collapsed. And so our head, as you follow the spiral wave, we want to be kind of suspended from above. A way to find that is the back of the palate. Just locate the back of the palate just a bit further and have that as a pivot point. And then I find when I go back to the back of the palate, my head starts to adjust and finds its place quite naturally. We want the shoulder blades to rest backwards. We don't want to be tense. We don't want to be this. We don't want to be rolled, slumped over. We don't want to be stiff. We just want to be naturally set, like our shoulders are sat in like this cradle. Remember the old phones, for those of you who can remember, where the phone would sit in that cradle. And that's the kind of idea that we're looking at there. And we want to just begin, and you can just close your eyes by, if you want, you don't have to, by bringing our attention to the rising and the falling of the breath. And first of all, this is the first stage. It's a quietening phase. Our word here is quiet. Let's just do that for a moment or so. Now, two things usually happen when we do this. I'm sorry to interrupt, but you could do this by yourself when this segment is over. Two things normally happen. Number one, we interfere, and that's what makes this such a good meditation technique, because it's so simple and so difficult. We'll want to interfere immediately. You tell someone, bring your attention to their breath, they start to try to breathe, and we're not doing that. We're already breathing, right? We've been breathing all the time our whole lives, otherwise we wouldn't be here. So what we're doing is we're bringing the attention to that. Now, it goes deeper than that. And in many meditation techniques, that's where I would just kind of just leave it, just do that. And if you can just do that, you're going to be way ahead of the game in terms of calmness and the ability to regulate your blood pressure and your pulse and your tension and anxiety and all kinds of stuff, really. A nervous system is what I'm trying to get at. So this is very, very good for reducing all of that fight or flight. So just the rising and the falling of the breath, just that observation of that, non-doing, non-action. We're not trying to interfere. In the practice, we're talking about this kind of modified Taoist approach. I'm calling it modified Taoist because I'm not a Buddhist, I'm not a Taoist, but we can take elements of their practices because they're ancient practices and very, very well thought out and modified and refined through hundreds of years. The idea here is that the breath and the mind are one. The breath and the mind are one. It kind of gets a little bit difficult to get one's head around at first, but if you can just latch your mind onto the breath just by this process of observation, then you'll find that they'll kind of be moving together in a way. And this is the first clue to really relaxing and letting go. This is a really wonderful thing if you can get the idea. A lot of times our mind is all over the place and it's just everywhere. I mean, we all know, right? We get so many thoughts, we get so scattered because there's so many things to do, there's so many distractions. So that's not a bad thing, it's just life. But if we want to come to a more centered place, then this is a wonderful technique. So we follow the breath, and you've heard so many times, we receive the breath, really. That's another way of really getting into this, that we're not doing anything. All we're doing is just opening to receive, and then we're just letting go of not receiving. So that's the first thing. If we can, and that's what I was trying to do in that very brief phase, just get you to, and get myself to attach the mind to the breath so that it begins to quiet. That's the first phase of this breathing technique, quiet. If you get here, you're really doing well. But now we'll go into a second phase, and we can say this by we're going deeper. And indeed, the next word, but how can I put it? The next stage or the next indication of progress is deep. The word deep. And deep means that the breath now that the mind is attached to the breath or following the breath, the mind now is going and the breath is going deeper into the body. And we'll feel this because we'll know where the breath goes. So you may just say, well, I'm just breathing and I just feel it here, which is fine. There's no right or wrong about any of this. But as you go quieter, and as you practice this, if you care to, and it's really worth practicing, by the way, that as you go deeper, as you go quieter, then the breath begins, then you suddenly say, well, I'm now feeling it lower in my body. Again, the mind and the breath are one. So where the breath goes, the mind goes. And you may start finding yourself getting a lot quieter inside simply because the breath is coming out of this crazy heads of ours and then coming down into the body. We may find it in our heart center. You may just go, I just want to I want to stay here because it feels good, which is fine. But actually, as you go deeper and deeper, you go deeper into the body. Eventually, we want it to come to rest around that point. Remember that point below the belly button? Remember we found the belly button, got the two fingers, boom, 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 down here. That point there, which is sometimes been called a false friend in a way, a false Dan Tien, but still a point at which our mind goes. That's about the level at which our breath goes. Of course, our lungs stop here, but you just feel it as an energetic. The breath will go there. There'll be like an expansion without any forcing. Again, this does take practice because a lot of us are up here. I mean, it takes a while for us just to get our shoulders to relax and our head just to not be forward slumping from all of that computer and device work and all of that. So deep. And eventually we kind of rested in the Dan Tien area. And this is where we come to a place called ease. So let's just go from quiet to deep to ease. We begin by observing the breath, receiving the breath. We're letting the breath go down of its own accord. We're not forcing anything. This is all natural. If your mind wanders, just bring it back to the breath. When our mind wanders and the breath and the mind are one, the breath can go with it as well, in which case we don't get that deepness. Now, if you can do this, and again, this may take you a few days, may take you a few months even, just to get the breath into that lower place. You want to connect it with that Dan Tien area. And at that point, you may find that point, there's a little warmth there, or there's a little, almost like a little tugging, like a fish on a line in a sense. There's a lot to be done with that in Taoist meditative practices that, again, is way beyond what we're doing here and is not needed actually unless you're really into that practice. I'm personally not a much more into the spiritual exercises, but why I find this helpful is in my day-to-day. So getting to that point of ease means that you're located there. Now, once you're located there and you can stay in that Dan Tien place, the breath down there, the breath and mind is one, you'll find that you'll be so much less reactive. In fact, you really won't be reactive at all. You'll be very understanding in some ways, or just accepting. Not passive at all, but just everything is okay, and you'll be there with whatever is going on because your mind won't be jumping to conclusions and judgments. It'll just be down there. Now, it helps with spiritual exercises because once you really are settled there, then your body is settled. Then you can bring the energy up into the heart or into the upper center, this third eye, and then do your exercises with a mantra, a sacred name, initiatory tones, and vibrate this area, and you'll find your body is much more quieter and settled, and your mind as well. So you'll be able to focus your attention where you need it. Now, once you get to this area of being at ease, and I'm talking about not when you just get up or off your chair or if you're sitting cross-legged on the floor, because your mind jumps with you, then you really haven't you've touched into being at ease, but you're not carrying that ease with you. We're talking about carrying the ease with you throughout the day. Not perfectly, of course not, but just for the most part, you're down here, you're centered, right? You're grounded, but also in a balanced way. You're not grounded. You're there, you're present. And this is very, very healthy for regulating the nervous system. We're not in fight or flight. We're not up here. We're not here. We're just down here, relaxed and calm. And I think I can hear it in my voice. I've certainly deeper voice than when I started out, because it's beginning to go down. And then more relaxed. That's what happens. Even just dropping the shoulders, breath goes down. And then the fourth stage is slow. And slow means this longer inhales and longer exhales. Here's the trap. You're not doing this. You're not making your exhales longer or your inhales longer. It's just happening naturally because you're at ease. And it's an indication of your progress along these steps into the fullness of breathing and into the lower Dan Tien. Now, the final stage is soft, where everything in this lower belly region is gliding and moving in a way that's kind of, the tissue is open, and it's now available to hold this electromagnetic field that exists down there, this bioelectrical field, which is this rechargeable battery. So you'll find you'll have more energy, more centeredness, and it does a lot of functions. We can go into that in another episode if you're interested. But for now, I think that's all we really need to cover, is just to bring the energy down slowly without forcing. We begin with quiet. And quiet is we become aware that the breath and the mind are one. So we kind of hook, for want of a better word, our mind onto the breath and just follow that breath. As the mind gets quiet, as we get quiet, we go deep. And deep is again a natural process. We're not forcing anything. But we become aware of where is that breath going in our body. Is it stuck up here, which is fine. We just can stay with it. But gradually, as you relax and practice this, the breath will go deeper and deeper until it comes into the lower belly. And you may even be aware of that point in the lower belly, the Dan Tien. And this is the point where we're at ease. The word is ease. It's a lovely word because it's a good indicator as well. Are you at ease? And if you're not at ease, then it's like, well, then your mind's gone somewhere else. And then slow. You'll find that your inhales and your exhales will be being much more extended. You'll feel like your lung capacity is increased. But we're not forcing it, and we're not increasing our lung capacity. This is just this natural unfolding process, which is causative, for want of a better word. I mean, there's a causation chain. We start with being quiet, and that leads us going to deep, which lets us become at ease, which slows our breath and extends our exhales and our inhales, that then the softness emerges. These are qualities that emerge out of our practice. And then we can just be in that lower belly, that Dan Tien area, and maybe you feel some warmth down there. It's not critical, it's just a reference point we're talking about. Now, just as a final word, I mean, some people just say, well, put your mind in your Dan Tien, particularly if you've done internal arts practice, like martial arts or the Chinese internal arts, they're called, the Tai Chi, or there's a form called Xingyi or Bagua, or those kind of things. They go, put your mind in your Dan Tien. And for so long when I did karate, it was just the false Dan Tien, right, just below the belly button. It wasn't inside. We're not putting our mind in our Dan Tien, not in this practice, because that makes an effort, right? We're doing something, and we're just letting ourselves be non-doing, which is much more sustainable and creates a much more expansive effect. So you don't want to just put your mind there, not in this practice. What we're doing is just allowing ourselves just to get there through a natural process. And then kind of we can energize that area. And that area, which in MSI terms called the basic self, is glad to receive us, because we're acknowledging it, we're listening to it. And then it can, just like anything we give our attention to, it comes alive. But if we force it, then we're creating tension, and then we're at odds with ourselves, certainly at odds of where we're going in this harmonic self journey. So let's just spend a minute or so just enjoying quiet, deep ease, slow, soft. Feeling the calmness that comes with our mind and breath being one, and being in that Dan Tien center. And when you're there, you can just tell that area, your basic self or the low Dan Tien, now we've taken care of the body, I'm going to move into the spiritual spheres. You could go up into the heart center and move into loving. And then you could go even further into the third eye center, chant the hue or other sacred tones, and just start to vibrate again in that center of the head. Of course, I always ask for the mystical traveler consciousness to guide me and my inner journey for the highest good. And in all that we do here, we always ask for the highest and purest light from the highest and purest source to surround and fill our space and each one of us for the highest good. The benefit of this is not only to yourself, it's to others. If you have a calm presence, you'll bring calm to the people around you, your family, your friends. These days we're not meeting too many people in person, but your friends on Zoom or who you talk to, they'll be able to feel in your voice a calmness. There's a vibration that radiates out. So it's a very, very valuable practice. And hopefully you're feeling that calmness. Bei Shan.